Gaywyck by Vincent Verga. Publisher Allison Books, Los Angeles, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. Maeve Elizabeth Wells arrived at Gaywyck 1 month to the day before the twins' 4th birthday. She was 43 and immediately felt she had found her true home. At age 13, she ran away from Kenmare, Ireland. She hiked around the Ring of Kerry and over to Limerick to avoid starving with her 9 younger brothers and sisters on a farm where nothing grew. Not liking the looks of Limerick, she hiked over through Roscrea and on to Dublin, which was too noisy and seemed as poor as Kenmare. She continued to Kells, where the earth seemed more inviting than the rocky fallow fields of her father's Kenmare. Stopping at the first large house she deemed attractive, she asked for employment of any kind. Just 16 hours previous to her ringing at the back door of the Brennan estate, the nursery maid in that household had run off with a stable hand. Maeve Wells was hired after 2 days. She said she found her calling. All her life, she had been caring for children. Her mother was constantly pregnant, continuously unwell. But fortunately, Maeve had a natural way with babes. She enjoyed sewing, cleaning, and comforting. Of course, as nursery maid for the Brennan children, she spent her entire day fetching for Nanny Keene. Food, goals, water. But being bright and quiet and quick to see what needed doing, she soon made herself invaluable. In 3 years, a new nursery maid was hired when she was promoted to under nanny. The 5 Brennan children adored her. She was small like one of them, gentle and patient, but always consistent and loving. Patience and perseverance brought the turtle dove to Dublin, as she would say with her unerring instinct for dispensing comfort and encouragement. At precisely the correct moment when Nanny Keene died, she became their nanny at 21, helping to ease their grief by her loving, continuous presence. She stayed until they were grown, then followed the eldest daughter, Aline, who had gone to Kent, England, as Lady Lowell. She raised the 4 titled children, then, as with her first brood, she followed the eldest married daughter, Rachel, to her new home. But instead of crossing the tumultuous Irish Sea, she crossed the vast Atlantic, where Lady Rachel and her wealthy American husband, Mr. Markson, lived in a mansion on fashionable 5th Avenue at 32nd Street in New York City. In September 1873, with each of Rachel's married sons eager for Nanny to take over his nursery, and little David's departure for Exeter imminent, she was called to the front parlor. It was a hot, oppressive day. David, recovering from scarlet fever, was distressed about leaving home. As she walked down the main stairs, she brooded. She was certain the summons was to discuss her future plans. How could she ever choose one of her boys over the other? She was surprised to find a gentleman with her mistress in the large front room. "Nanny!" Rachel exclaimed, rising from the plush chair to take her hand. "Nanny, please, dear. This is Mr. Gaylord." So it had begun. Before discussing his situation, he asked with honest concern after David, and was relieved to hear the child was nearly well, commiserating with them on the scarlet fevers having kept them from their country estate. And then he told her candidly of his wife's illness. He detailed the disastrous experience with the first woman to whom he had entrusted his 2 boys, and offered her the position of nanny in his household. He asked that she decide quickly. He expressed a sincere gratitude to his business partner's wife for considering him worthy to be interviewed by Mrs. Wells. Then, with little formality, he was gone. Nanny Wells liked the man. She liked the polite way he addressed her, using the honorary Mrs. She liked the way he gazed forthrightly into her eyes, and did not shy away when she held his attention in the same direct manner. She liked his gravity, his evident strength, and concern for his boy's welfare. But most of all, she liked his fierce, proud beauty, which recalled the dark, sad father and lost grown brothers of her native Kenmare. She liked, too, the ideal of a house by the sea. Even before he was gone, she had decided in his favor. Rachel detained her after Gaylord departed. "Nanny, I know how difficult it's been for you to choose between our boys. When Mr. Gaylord spoke to me last night at the opera of his desperate need for a good, loving woman to look after his twins, how could I not think of you? If you decide to leave our family, everyone will understand." Later in the day, when Rachel arrived to take tea with David, it was evident she had been crying. She sat next to Nanny and frequently rose to kiss her former nursemaid. By the next afternoon, it was all arranged. David was leaving for Exeter in 6 days. Rachel planned to leave for the country at that time. In 6 days, Nanny Wells left for Gaywyck. The journey was made by steamboat, Mr. Gaylord having offered Mrs. Wells a choice: rail, road, sea. Was pleased when she preferred the water route, but his plans did not sit well with his sons. The twins had been bedded on the ship the previous night for a dawn departure from Gaywyck. When the ship arrived in Manhattan, only Danough was aboard, his twin having absconded sometime before sunrise. Gaylord was enraged by his son's perversity. Nanny Wells reassured him all children were mischievous at that age, but always had good reasons for doing what they did. Gaylord was convinced it had been done primarily to provoke him, and Nanny agreed that was a possibility, but insisted there might have been other motivations as well. The parent grudgingly nodded, appeased by her not equating his son's disobedience with his own failings as a father. She requested he show her his lovely vessel. During the exchange, the boy in the white sailor suit stood watching and listening from behind and around a book. He was amazed she had not automatically assumed his brother guilty. He was impressed by the way she had mollified his father. When she extended her tiny hand to him, he willingly took it and walked by her side, touring the steamboat under her white umbrella. After luncheon, the two sat on the upper deck under a pale green awning. The color was celery. It fluttered in the cooling, moist breeze. The sky and unrippled sea seemed all of a piece. She said, and gilded by the hot sun. The boy was immersed in thought. She left the child to himself. Gaylord was below, working with an assistant in his cabin. "You were right," the child spoke suddenly. "My brother had good reasons for doing what he did. I thought as much. We all have our reasons for doing what we do. It's what makes life sad sometimes." "I understand. I'm sure you do." "He was afraid you'd be like her," he offered after a long, deep silence. "Like the one before you." "I hope not," she responded matter-of-factly, as though the thought had never crossed her mind. The child nodded. He felt he had made his position clear and had been accepted on his own terms. The new experience exhilarated him. "He told me he was afraid he'd start to cry in front of Papa if you were. He makes believe he's braver than he is." "Many of us do, don't. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as we know what we're up to." "And up against." "Yes," she agreed, "and up against." "May I tell you a secret?" he whispered. "Yes, of course, Dote, if you would like to." "I'm really Cormac." "Oh," she said. "Hello, Cormac." They both laughed. She looked closely at the little boy sitting by her side. If he could fool his own father. During lunch, a dollop of lobster salad had dropped on his left sleeve. His overreaction, verging on distress, ruined the meal for her. She had ignored the incident, but even now he sat with his right hand covering the stain. Her heart ached for him. She said a quick prayer for Nanny Crookshank's newest charges. The sun looks like a juicy plum," she said. "It frequently does," he answered, unsettled by his having revealed himself to this small creature so quickly, or at all. There were many changes in the nursery the first days of her life at Gaywyck. All their pleasant sense memories began with Nanny Wells. Her first official act was to have the baroquely patterned wallpaper removed and washable paint supplied in colors of their choice. "You live here too, you know." The dado in the sitting room she discussed with them, and would not have commissioned without their approval. All the mousetraps were removed. God's little creatures are precious too. We'll get a cat, a fat, fluffy one. A huge, overstuffed sofa was introduced in front of the fireplace, where all three sat, or sprawled, comfortably, to read or play at going to sea, or simply to talk at night before bed, sipping warm milk with the drapes drawn and the kerosene lamp turned low. "You don't want to eat, Don't? Don't eat," she said sweetly early on, leaving Carmack stunned and speechless. "You don't like cauliflower? You have plenty of time to learn to appreciate cauliflower. You know, Carmack, it's like nothing else on God's green earth. Vegetables are a bit like people. Everyone is different, and everyone is good. You may not like them all, but you should give each a fair shake." Suddenly, they inhabited a warm, embracing, private place. She brought with her a way of life rich in tradition and luxury, from the clear, amber-colored bars of Pear's soap to the Huntley and Palmer biscuits and plum puddings in their bright tins. 2 English collapsible tubs replaced their heated gray metal one, and the chamber pots were used as planters. "When you need to use the toilet, lambs, you know where it is." And by the packing case, she ordered playing cards, picture puzzles, cutouts, armies of toy soldiers, British and American, stuffed animals, and, with Gaylord's assistance, a library. When asked about her rules, she said she suspected they recognized a transgression, and except for the basic rules of civility, all the other malarkey could be dispensed with. One of the other changes was the relations between the nursery and the staff below stairs. Tensions eased. She paid a call on Mrs. Morgan, the cook, and her assistant niece, Lucy, to smooth over the rumpled feelings. She had sent a note to Mrs. Morgan via the nursery maid, Geraldine, requesting permission to make the visit. Cook, knowing her place, had offered to journey to the 3rd floor, but Nanny insisted, and Cook acquiesced. Pleased and flattered, they met in the servants' parlor, over teacups and chocolate chip cookies. "I understand, Mrs. Morgan, that my predecessor had a special menu for the boys with special mealtimes." Mrs. Morgan nodded stiffly. Niece Lucy sat silently, a witness to her aunt's good behavior, should the encounter turn ugly. "Well, there'll be no need for such stuff and nonsense any longer, I can tell you. We'll take luncheon with the others, so you'll be prepared only the one meal for us all from now on." Mrs. Morgan nodded less stiffly. Niece Lucy smiled, relieved but slightly disappointed, as she reached for her 5th cookie. "Breakfast, however, seeing as the Dotes are up so much earlier at the crack, if you will." "I understand, Mrs. Wells. Breakfast was never a problem. I must be out of bed early, too. It was lunch and tea that drove me wild. Are you devoted to rice pudding, Mrs. Wells?" "Can't abide it, Mrs. Morgan. I do believe the boys have had their fill of the stuff. 2 fresh fruit will do nicely. Raw will suffice. I leave it to your judgment. Your niece looks fine, a healthy girl. Whatever you feed her, I'm sure will be nicely." "Thank you, Mrs. Wells." "You're welcome, I'm sure, Mrs. Morgan." The nursery had the finest teas from that day forward, with Mrs. Morgan as a guest of Nanny Wells every so often, to explain to the boys how food was prepared and to answer any questions they might have on the subject. Each night, when the twins were bathed and safely in their bed, the 2 women sat and talked together in the sitting room, sipping hot cocoa, the light shining warmly under the floor, the chattering female voices in soft harmonies, whispering like the breaking waves of the calmly eternal sea, gave a comfort to the children that eventually soothed away bad dreams. "She never learned to read," Danough added, removing his shirt to take the sun. "We read to her every night before going to bed. She had great shelves built around the room, so everything was always in the open, accessible at any hour. As we grew taller, our books moved up in the world with us. Cormac liked that best, I think. He rarely tried to hide anything from her or fool her. When he did, it was usually from a sense of fun, and she never mistook one of us for the other. "You look like two different people to me," she'd say, unable to understand the business with the rings or how we fooled the others. Two different people, which is as it should be, dotes, seeing as that's what you are. We scrambled to our feet and started to walk toward the house. "What did you read to her?" "Stevens, Dickens, later Shakespeare. She loved a good story. She's a simple soul, a very happy, gentle woman who sang hymns to herself while she sewed and rocked." "Hymns?" "Yes, hymns to her beloved, sweet Jesus. Closer, I may add, to Wilde's Christ than Rome's. I think she never insinuated religious ways because she set a good example, which she expected us to follow. Even in the middle of Cormac's blackest rages, she never mentioned the devil, but only his need to govern himself. She considered his foul temper a part of him to be tamed, not an outrageous or disgusting extremity to be eliminated. She was as different from the first one as summer from winter, or a caterpillar from a butterfly, I thought, as Cale bounded up the beach in our direction. It's odd how clearly one remembers, he continued, stooping to greet Cale. She loved blue and violet and dark gray. Every day she would change from a morning white cotton front to a dark cotton print for lunch, emerging for tea in one of her many bombazine dresses. The rustle of that fabric still makes me think of bread and butter, fingers dipped in egg yolk or peeled and seeded grapes. Cormac once described her nursery as the most successful realization on our planet of the Platonic ideal of civilization. We were nearly at the top of the wooden steps and could hear Goodbody and Mortimer arguing amidst the yews. "Don't be so snarky," Mortimer demanded. "I am not snarky. I'm never snarky. But how can you stand there and tell me to be objective? How can one be objective about the past when one is always at the center of the present?" Mortimer seemed relieved to see us. "Did you two have a lovely walk? I feared we lost you." We both nodded and muttered affirmative replies. "Good. I have had the most trying time with this item. If it isn't objectivity complications, it's the monadic systems." "I'm hungry," Goodbody growled. "Our food. I neglected to mention food." We went into lunch. The four of us were alone at table and had an interesting conversation regarding objectivity or the absence of it in our lives. "In the first place," Goodbody insisted forcefully, "we spend all our time in the middle of what happens to us, always at the center of our own landscape. We never learn how to see, never mind see objectively." One of the things that enraged Cormac was people seeing us as one and the same. From the momentary pause following Danough's statement, I could tell how surprised friends were to hear him speak so directly of his brother. I knew it to be a continuation of our previous conversation. "Precisely," Goodbody agreed. "People see what they want to see, or need to see," Mortimer added. "The difference being," I asked, making certain I understood. "Need implies compulsion. Want, choice. We may be predisposed to a particular need by learning and circumstance, but ultimately, everything must pass through the mind for review and decision. Ideally, we should lead our lives by choosing one choice gracefully leading to the next, guided by need and harness. One foot in front of the other." "Thank you, Mortimer. There's something primitive, I think, about living one's life according to need alone. Don't you think so, Donnie?" "Yes, of course I do," he said, frowning. "But I think we tend to malign our feelings, our inclinations. We tend to make them subservient to our reasoning processes. I think the one should instruct and be instructed by the other. Used alone, reason can lead to chaos. On that point, Nietzsche is right. You equate feeling with need, reason with want?" "Yes, It's grossly simplistic, I know, but yes, for our purposes, I do. I also think there is more to heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our philosophy, but not in Dr. Freud. Yes, I expect chaos is the only way we appreciate the dichotomy and strive to bring the two together. Or go mad. How does one tell need from want? Honesty, observation, hard work. Which could be just other words for objectivity. After lunch, I went for a walk alone. Danough had work to do, he said, and Goodbody and Mortimer followed his example, locked themselves in Library 1 to frame a brief. It had turned sultry, the air scented by cut grass and the mulch-covered undergrowth surrounding the house. I strolled through the birch grove, directing my steps on the longest route to the waterfall, bypassing the pond to check the swans. I had decided to swim and swing dry in the hammock. Stripping, I stepped under the cascade, then dived into its pool. It was icy, but I enjoyed the plunge and swam to the far end. As I swung around, a figure appeared behind the shimmering curtain of water, moved through it, and stood bathed in sunlight on the ledge for a moment before diving. I thought you had work to do, I teasingly called to the submerged, approaching body. I watched him swimming toward me below the surface. I moved backward, but he grabbed my legs and pulled himself up by wrapping his limbs around me like a giant squid. I shouted gleefully, expecting to be released as soon as I saw his face, but he retained his tight clasp while the water flowed from his hair into his eyes, and he laughed aloud at my ineffectual struggling. He squeezed me hard. I opened my mouth to protest. He covered it with his and ran his tongue over my lips. Lifted me. He carried me to the hammock, with the gentleness of summer in his eyes. At last, I thought, fear rising. But what? Swaying in the warm air, I responded beneath him, eager to know. When he stroked me, I started trembling and squirmed to escape. Suddenly, shamed by the violence of my excitement and frightened as it expanded beyond recall, until I felt his passion rise and pass mine. Leaning me forward, restraining me with tender words, slowly and carefully he pressed me further into the blind force of pleasure. The appalling pleasure of love. I nearly tossed us out of the hammock. He grasped me, pulling me back to him. I shouted. He held me securely, whispering his need for me. That was easy. Wonderful, I thought, relieved and ecstatic. He kissed the tears on my neck. I opened my eyes and looked into his. They were wide, with love and clear as dawn. I saw passions there that I never knew existed. What had suddenly awakened him? He was perspiring heavily. He smiled at me. I started to laugh. A deep, loud, raucous laugh. What's so funny? He asked, confused. I don't know. It's so silly, absurd, and so wonderful. No sadness? He asked quietly. Why should I feel sad? Some people do. Not me. Do you? Sometimes. Maybe next time. I lunged to hug him, successfully toppling us to the soft, mossy earth. He scrambled to his feet and stood straddling me. A searingly erotic image, I thought, of the Cellini Satyr. Sadness? I asked, grasping his calves. He grinned, the shy, sweet grin I loved, lowering himself to my side. He let me handle him and fondle him until the urgency of his body propelled me into passion. When he separated us and splashed into the pool, I lay giddy and disoriented, but bizarrely calm. I did not see him leave, yet I knew he was gone. At tea, I ate ravenously, sitting opposite Danough, brushed a damp curl from his forehead. Did you enjoy the sea, Donnie? Mortimer asked. Yes, it's splendid this time of year. You should join me. Were you with him? Goodbody asked, disbelieving the word splendid. Not in the sea, no. I was at the waterfall. I glanced at him for approval. He was cutting the mince pie. That night I waited for him to come to my room. We had a riotous evening in the music room. My chopping was a success, and upon retiring I had boldly, softly kissed him on the lips. Taking my hand, he had lovingly pressed it to his warm cheek. I felt certain the change in our relationship was for all time. When the clock chimed 1:30, I impatiently extinguished my light, pulled on my robe, and barefoot hastened to him. There was no light under his door. I knocked. Receiving no answer, I returned to my room, unwilling to invade his bedchamber uninvited. Perhaps he was swimming. I went to my windows. Goodbody and Mortimer stood on the portico in quiet conversation, their arms around each other. Furtively, I opened the windows a crack to hear. "I don't know, dear," Goodbody said sadly. "He seems very confused by it all. Do you think he's ready?" "He's ready for a love affair, but not for love." "Would he?" "No, of course not." I closed the window and climbed into bed, left them to their speculations. They were wrong, but I certainly was in no position to correct them. The next morning I awoke slowly from deep, restful sleep, dreams forgotten, but a tantalizing sense of indomitable delight remaining. Flowers were everywhere: dandelions, forget-me-nots, iris, spiderwort, and blue violet. A black orchid was on my pillow. I was crowned with tendrils of wild flowers. At breakfast, he was playful and warm, but never betrayed our new intimacy. I studied Goodbody and Mortimer for telltale signs. There was none. While he and Mortimer enthusiastically tossed a football on the shore, Goodbody and I walked and talked. I turned the subject to love. "I love him," I confessed at the first opportunity, thrilled to be telling it. "I know you do. It's quite obvious." "I mean, I love him as you love Mortimer." "I know what you mean." "And he loves me." "Yes, Robbie, he does. He loves you very much. He never thought. I mean, be patient. He isn't like the rest of us. Love is trustees for him. Do you understand? He's just beginning to accept. I've never seen him so happy." I grinned. Keeping the secret, I was violently happy. After lunch, I hurried to the waterfall. Undressed, I waited for him in the hammock. He appeared in the foliage, naked, moving toward me as confidently as a wild animal in its natural habitat. I reveled in his power over me. He's like Adam, I thought. He looks newly formed by an overgenerous God. Twice I laughed tumultuously. I apologized the first time, thinking perhaps the seriousness of our love was affronted by the peal of joy. He said my laughter was a most beautiful denouement and proceeded to provoke it a second time. At tea, we discussed Spinoza's belief that timidity is an emotion one must struggle to overcome. I resolved in the future to evade his bedroom. The next 2 days were magnificent. When we were not together at the waterfall, we were with our friends, walking, riding, playing tennis and football on the rear lawn, or talking about his family and mine. Once we went swimming, but the sight of him reduced me to a stuttering timorousness that unexpectedly inflamed me with lust. I fled the spot, blaming the temperature of the water for my discomfort, but inwardly furious and shamed by my intemperance. At the waterfall, when I gave him my real reason for leaving the group, he laughed and ordered me to practice self-discipline. "Or everyone will know." "And what is wrong with that?" "Not yet. There's time enough for that." A Saturday night, he came to my room in the middle of the night, waking me with his strong hands and licentious kisses. His hair was wet and smelled of the sea. He was anxious lest we awaken Goodbody and Mortimer. I could understand his preference for the waterfall as he nervously checked his wristwatch, fearful of sleeping into the light. "Rosy-figured Dawn," I whispered, "annoyed, is no friend," drawing him back for a humoring parting kiss. The last morning, Easter Sunday, we met before breakfast, and I cried in his arms at the thought of losing him. We met again after lunch and after tea, but he seemed distant, and I feared my tears had been melodramatic and excessive. Yet I still managed to utter, "I'll never be lonely again. I'll fill every corner of your life with my love." "We're always lonely," he responded brusquely. "Love makes it bearable. That's all. Fill every corner of your own life. I'll take care of mine. At 6, they left for the train. When Danough took my hand, I smiled at him and told him to hurry back to Gaywyck. He said yes. I said I would be waiting. I kissed him to upset his composure and test my power over him. I could feel his muscles tense under his clothing. I wrote in my journal until dawn after watching the sunrise. I tried to sleep, hugging the cat, pretending Kale was he come to ease and quaking sense of desolation. Everything is different now, I thought, trying to convince myself, unable to accept the inability of love to keep away fear. Fill every corner of your own life. I'll take care of mine. He doesn't understand yet. The power of love will change things. When he loves me as I love him perfectly, completely, everything will be fine. Love is both needing and wanting to need. Love is the tyranny of love. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.